The Trump administration has opened a broader pressure campaign against the International Criminal Court. In a July 13th announcement, the State Department promised what it called a whole-of-government response to systematically disable the court's ability to operate. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Washington is considering additional sanctions and travel bans on court personnel and affiliated organizations. The department also raised pressure on countries that receive American assistance, particularly military and law enforcement partners, to reject the court's authority over United States officials and service members. Evidence: Al Jazeera and the New York Times reported the announcement and noted that many operational details remain unspecified. Background: Washington never joined the Rome Statute, which created the court in 2002, and the court nevertheless maintains that it may investigate citizens of non-member countries when alleged crimes occur on the territory of a member, as in its Afghanistan inquiry. No American has been prosecuted in that investigation. Stakes: the immediate consequence could be tighter financial and diplomatic constraints on the court, along with difficult choices for allied governments that support it while depending on Washington. The next checkpoint is concrete action: new sanctions, aid conditions, travel restrictions, or formal requests to allies. Allied responses will show whether the campaign isolates the court or deepens disagreement with Washington. A federal judge has voided the settlement between President Trump and the Justice Department that would have ended his $10 billion lawsuit over the leak of his tax returns. United States District Judge Kathleen Williams ruled Monday that the two sides were not genuinely opposed to one another, a basic constitutional requirement for a civil case. Evidence: Reuters, the Associated Press, USA Today, and Al Jazeera. The agreement had directed $1.8 billion into an anti-weaponization fund and offered broad tax protections to Trump, his family, and affiliated businesses. Williams wrote that the case had been used to give legal cover to immunity and to earmark taxpayer money for grievances not defined in law. Background: the administration had already abandoned the compensation fund after bipartisan opposition, but the ruling also strikes at the tax protections. Williams referred Trump attorney Alejandro Brito and senior Justice Department officials who approved the deal to state bar authorities for possible ethics review. Stakes: the ruling leaves the original tax return dispute without this settlement and creates a second test for the Justice Department's handling of the case. Watch first for an appeal or revised agreement. The next political checkpoint comes at Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing, where senators can question the department's role and the judge's findings. Supreme Court Justices Elena Kagan and Amy Coney Barrett are making a rare appearance on Capitol Hill as Congress considers the court's fiscal 2027 budget. The session is centered on urgent security funding at a time when the court says threats against justices and judicial facilities are rising. Evidence: PBS and CNN list the justices for an appropriations hearing on the budget request, while the New York Times has reported on the unusual testimony and the security case behind it. House appropriators have already advanced legislation providing about $207 million for the court, nearly $44 million more than current funding. Background: that proposed increase is not final. House and Senate negotiators still have to agree on appropriations language before any measure reaches the president. Stakes: the appearance matters because justices usually communicate institutional needs through written submissions and court officials rather than public testimony. Lawmakers may press them on how protection would be divided among the justices, court buildings, employees, and family members, and on what safeguards accompany a larger budget. The immediate checkpoint is the testimony, including any threat figures or spending details the justices provide. After that, watch committee markups and the final funding bill to see whether Congress preserves the increase, changes its conditions, or scales it back. Oil markets are pushing a once-unlikely Federal Reserve rate increase into serious debate. As fighting around the Strait of Hormuz drove crude higher, contracts and prediction markets showed a sharp rise in the perceived chance of a July increase. Evidence: CNBC Top and Bloomberg reported that Kalshi traders put the probability near 36%, up from less than 20% on Sunday and below 10% earlier in July. A separate market tracker placed the implied CME probability around 46.5%. Those figures measure trader positioning, not a Federal Reserve forecast, and they can reverse quickly. Background: the economic link is inflation. Expensive oil raises transportation and production costs, which can feed into gasoline, freight, and consumer prices. Stakes: that could make officials more reluctant to ease policy or reopen the case for tightening, despite the risk that an energy shock also slows growth. Brent crude rose more than 9% Monday to about $81 a barrel, while United States oil was reported above $75. The next checkpoints are physical shipping flows, daily oil prices, and the next inflation readings. Then listen for whether Federal Reserve officials describe the shock as temporary or persistent. The decision belongs to the Federal Open Market Committee. Market odds remain a volatile signal until that meeting concludes. Israel will hold a national election on October 27th, setting the country's first parliamentary vote since the Hamas attack of October 7, 2023, and the wars that followed in Gaza and Lebanon. Evidence: Reuters and The Guardian reported the date through the governing coalition, and France 24 said it is the latest voting day permitted by law. That timing allows Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to complete a full 4-year term, a rarity in Israel's frequently fractured coalition politics. The campaign's final stretch will overlap with the 3rd anniversary of the attack, placing security failures, the conduct of the wars, hostages, military service, and post-war policy at the center of public debate. Background: the vote is widely viewed as a referendum on Netanyahu's wartime leadership, but Israel's electoral system means the decisive contest is also over coalition arithmetic. Parties win seats through proportional representation, and a prime minister needs partners controlling a majority in the 120-seat Knesset. Stakes: continuing regional conflict could reshape voter priorities or coalition discipline. Watch next for final candidate lists, party mergers or withdrawals, and polling around the electoral threshold. After ballots are counted, the president will consult party leaders and assign one lawmaker the task of building a governing majority. The confrontation around the Strait of Hormuz has moved into another dangerous phase, with American strikes, Iranian retaliation, tanker casualties, and a blockade timetable converging on the same waterway. Evidence: Al Jazeera and CNBC report that United States Central Command said its 3rd consecutive night of attacks lasted 5 hours and hit military targets at Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas. Iranian outlets reported attacks on vessels and strikes against American-linked sites across Gulf states. Those battlefield accounts cannot all be independently reconciled in real time and remain claims by the named governments. Stakes: one consequence is concrete. The United Arab Emirates said 2 tankers were struck by Iranian cruise missiles in Omani waters, killing an Indian crew member and wounding 8 people. The United States blockade of Iranian ports is scheduled to begin at 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time Tuesday. Background: Hormuz normally handles about 1/5 of global oil flows. Brent rose more than 9% Monday to roughly $81 a barrel, and Kepler estimated crossings fell about 52% from July 10th through 12th compared with the prior week. Watch the first inspections, vessel diversions or confrontations, updated casualties, and any renewed diplomatic contacts. Those events will determine whether traffic stabilizes or the escalation becomes a sustained energy shock. 2 separate wildfire emergencies are testing authorities in France and Spain during another spell of extreme European heat. In France, officials described the blaze in the Fontainebleau forest southeast of Paris as exceptional in scale. Evidence: AP News and The Washington Post report that roughly 900 homes were evacuated, road and rail links were disrupted, and firefighting aircraft were brought north from southern France. Fontainebleau is a major natural area and heavily visited destination close to the capital, putting transport corridors beyond the burn zone at risk when winds shift. The Spanish emergency is distinct and considerably deadlier. 10 people remained unaccounted for Monday after a fire tore through a remote expatriate community in the south, where 13 deaths had already been reported. Search teams there are trying to find missing residents and establish an accurate toll. Background: exceptional heat and dry vegetation have primed the region for fire, making ignition easier and containment more difficult. Stakes: immediate consequences include displaced families, closed routes, hazardous smoke, and pressure on crews responding across multiple countries. In France, watch containment lines, wind forecasts, evacuation orders, and restoration of rail and road service. In Spain, the critical checkpoint is the missing persons search and formal identification of victims. Officials: updates must keep the 2 locations separate as numbers and conditions change.